and welcome to all GOLD viewers who are here with us today. I'm Kristen Schwartz, licensed midwife and MC for GOLD, and I'm here today with Lyndsey Hookway. Hi, Lyndsey.
Hi.
It's so good to have you back here at GOLD.
It's lovely to be back. Thank you for having me.
Lyndsey, of course, you are one of our speakers here for the GOLD Lactation Online Conference that's just around the corner. We get started here on April 3rd with our big opening keynote. Can't wait for that. And your presentation has a really cool title, and it's titled More Support in a Coffee Shop Than in the Hospital, Experiences of Breastfeeding Children with Medical Complexity. We'll jump into that in just a moment. First of all, Lyndsey, where in the world are you?
I am from Southwest Devon, so it's a little soggy corner of England. Yeah, and I live here with my family, my kids, my dogs, my chicken on wild and wet Dartmoor.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Hopefully the weather will change for you eventually. There are some sunny days in Devon too, no?
There are, just occasionally.
Just occasionally. Lyndsey, of course, you're an expert in IBCLC. You are an expert in breastfeeding, breast and chest feeding medically complex infants. So tell us a little bit about your background for all those of our viewers who are not yet familiar with you.
Sure. So I am a pediatric nurse by background and children's public health nurse. I am no longer clinical, but I have always worked with children. So I worked with children with acute and chronic conditions in hospitals. I did work a little bit with preterm little ones on the neonatal unit, but most of my work has actually been in the pediatric setting, which is distinctly and organizationally different from the neonatal and maternity setting. So I'm very passionate about pediatrics as a standalone topic. You're right, I'm also an IBCLC and have been for about 12 years, and probably better known for my responsive sleep advocacy, but actually I only got into sleep in the first place because of my work with families, and which was via public health nursing essentially. So I am very much first and foremost a nurse and proud of it.
Beautiful. You're also a PhD researcher at Swansea University. So talk about your research.
Yeah, sure. So because this is such a distinct discipline, because pediatrics is, it's kind of been a little bit forgotten actually by the lactation world, actually, I would say. Most of the literature that exists is focused on either the preventative nature of breastfeeding and how it reduces the risk of various infectious, atopic, malignant and autoimmune diseases. And then there is also a whole load of literature about why breastfeeding is important in a general sense for all children. And then there's a whole load of other literature that talks about the importance of breastfeeding for preterm infants and to prevent some of the comorbidities associated with prematurity. But there's virtually no research on how and why it's more difficult to breastfeed sick children beyond the neonatal period. So that might be children from perhaps as young as a few days old, but it might also include those older children. And my experience has been that because there is usually no designated infant feeding team within pediatrics, and because it's so distinct and separate, certainly in the UK, other countries may manage this differently and whatever, but my experience in the UK has been that most of the time, when a child who is breastfed presents to the pediatric ward and is admitted either with a short-term self-limiting condition or a more acute, chronic condition, what happens is nobody on the ward has got the expertise required to be able to manage their lactation needs as well as their clinical needs. And when they reach out to their maternity colleagues or their neonatal colleagues, unfortunately, those colleagues aren't familiar usually with the sorts of challenges that present with older children. And so there's this huge gap in the literature and also in terms of clinical skills, in terms of how we manage and support these older children and children with more chronic conditions that are not necessarily associated with prematurity. So for example, children who present with cancers, children who present with autoimmune conditions, children who present with sepsis later on in their breastfeeding journey. So their lactation needs are different, their clinical needs are different, and all of this is taking place in an environment that is less supportive of breastfeeding. So enter the PhD, which I've finished actually, but I'm in that kind of limbo sort of stage of waiting for my viva. But that's been an amazing privilege to have been able to take a deep dive, and I'm going to be talking about a couple of the studies that I've done during my my PhD.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Can't wait for that. And you're closing kind of, you spoke about that gap between, you know, that there's not enough research out there on the topic and clinical skills. So you're working on closing these gaps, right? I'm also concerned about the clinical skills, as you mentioned. What can be done there to help these children in the hospital to close that gap when it comes to breastfeeding these older infants with medical complexities?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I'd refer you to my thesis, but it's not available online yet. But that's basically what I've been trying to do for the last few years. Essentially, my research has found that the people who are the best placed individuals to support very, very complex clinical conditions alongside lactation protection are the people with dual skills. So they are the pediatric clinicians who are also trained to support breastfeeding. Unfortunately, those individuals are pretty rare. And that's such a shame, because again, whilst it's getting much more common to find those sort of dual skills within the maternity and midwifery setting, and also within the neonatal setting, there's just been a massive underinvestment in pediatrics. And so there are very, very few pediatricians, pediatric nurses, pediatric therapists like speech and language therapists, dietitians, occupational therapists, and physiotherapists who are experienced at supporting breastfeeding as well. But they do exist. And so what I've been trying to do is kind of tap into their expertise. I think what's not going to work is applying what works in the preterm population to the pediatric population. I've found again and again that actually misses the mark for a lot of these families. But there are some things that can be borrowed. And when you've got somebody who understands the fundamentals of lactation, and they are also pediatric clinicians, they are actually really good at being able to marry up the clinical needs of the child with that respect and compassion for the lactation needs as well. And parents tend to have a better experience when they encounter these professionals who have those skills. So I think there's a lot of skills that those dual qualified clinicians can share with the lactation community as a wider kind of solution to the very, very limited number of people who have those dual skills.
And it's possibly also that somebody who watches this now, you know, is being inspired to get that dual qualification, you know, in their field, realizing, you know what, yes, there is such a need for it, and we need to fill that skills gap. So, and lactation is something I'm interested in, so I'm gonna go more in that. So hopefully, by exposing this and talking more about this and bringing it to light, hopefully we inspire also the professionals to go that route and get that extra education there. That's my hope here.
Yeah,
also.
I hope so. There are a lot of people in pediatrics who care about this. And actually that was one of the things that came out of another study that I'm going to be talking about less during this presentation. But the other study found that there's a lot of enthusiasm and love for breastfeeding among pediatric clinicians. They really are hungry for more knowledge and information. So I think there is thirst out there, and I wouldn't dream of saying that I'm the only person who cares about this. There are a lot of pediatric clinicians who care about breastfeeding. It's just that not very many people are researching it. So again, as you say, just, you know, bringing this to the front of everybody's minds, just reminding them that pediatrics needs some investment too. Hopefully that can go some way.
That can happen. Yes. Your title of the presentation, more support in a coffee shop than in a hospital. Where did you come up with that title?
So that was actually a quote from one of my research participants who was, she shared so many stories. She shared a story of how she asked for somewhere where she could lie down and feed her son lying down, who was, I think, 3 at the time.
Right.
And nobody was facilitating that. They were trying to make him go in a small cot and give her a chair to sleep in. And she said, the only way he's going to breastfeed is if I lie down. And so she ended up putting her coat on the floor of the hospital.
Oh my goodness.
And she lay down on her coat on the floor and breastfed him on the floor. So many stories that I could share, and I won't have time during the presentation to share them all. But one of her sort of parting comments to me was, you go to a coffee shop and you don't even have to buy anything. They just come over and they offer you water and they ask you if there's anything you need and all of that. And yet you go into a hospital and you are trying to breastfeed your 3-year-old and they don't even offer you a drink of water, never mind support your breastfeeding needs. And it really stayed with me, that quote, more support in a coffee shop than on the pediatric ward. And yet that was her experience. And unfortunately, that's been the experience of quite a number of the parents that I've had the privilege of interviewing as well.
And you will share some of their stories in your presentation. Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit before I let you go here as parting words, what you're hoping that our viewers will get a takeaway from your presentation.
Sure. I think honestly the biggest hope that I have is that people can start really understanding the uniqueness of pediatrics. Pediatrics is a wonderful clinical discipline because you're caring for littles potentially who are 3 days in terms of lactation all the way up to the preschool years. Children present with a mind-boggling array of conditions at different ages, and so you've got different conditions than those that present in the newborn and neonatal period. They also occur at different ages and stages, and that will necessarily affect what stage of lactation they're in as well as their developmental needs and their social and relational needs. And so it becomes actually quite a fascinating thing to research because things like responsible parenting come in, sleep comes in. Again, I can't get away from sleep, Kristen.
You can't get away from it.
Even if I research sick children, sleep still gets in there somehow. So it becomes actually quite broad and complex. And personally, I love that. And I would just love the lactation community to get a real handle on the uniqueness of this population. Pediatrics is not the same as the maternity or neonatal setting. Is absolutely distinct, and it deserves a unique focus and a massive investment in terms of specific nuanced pediatric focused training and designated resources and skill mix as well.
Yes, resources and skills. Yes, absolutely. Well, Lyndsey, thank you so much for coming here today, spending time here with me, talking about the wonderful work you've been doing and also the presentation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I can't tell you, I'm so excited about this presentation. I'm looking forward to it very much. As I mentioned before this presentation, more support in a coffee shop than in the hospital. Experiences of breastfeeding children with medical complexity is part of the GOLD Lactation Online Conference of 2023 and will be live. The conference will get started with our opening keynote, April 3rd. That is open access. The keynote presentation is open access, so everybody will be able to sign up for that. And if you would like to find out more about Lyndsey's presentation and all the other presentations in the conference, we would like to invite you to go to goldlactation.com. You'll find all the times of all the lifetimes of all the presentations there as well. But don't worry, everything is already also will be recorded. So if you can't be there live, the recording will be available for our viewers to watch at the time that's convenient for them. So thank you everyone for participating and watching here today. Thank you, Lyndsey, one more time. And I hope to see everyone at the conference. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye for now.